What a story. Good morning. Good to see you guys. Hey, grab a Bible if you got one handy and meet me in Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4 is where we're going to be. Page 685 of the Bibles that look like mine. There should be one right near you in your chair. If there's not, there's some on the racks in the back. Grab one of those. You can borrow it for today. You can keep it for good, whatever works for you, whatever you need. We'd love for you to have Mark chapter 4 in front of you, page 685 and these. This is week 3 of the unanswered questions of Jesus. For the last 3 weeks, we've said over the course of about 3.5 years of public ministry here on earth, Jesus asked nearly twice as many direct questions as he answered. And there's something about the silence, right? The moment between the asking of a really great question and its answer that throws whole worlds into balance, especially when it comes to our most important relationships. From, will you go out with me? Or will you be my friend? Will you marry me? To questions like, does this dress make my look fat? While you wait for an answer, between the asking of the question and its answer, a world hangs in the balance. In the case of that last question, your life may hang in the balance. So answer it quickly, right? But answer it correctly when you get ready to answer the question. And our most important relationship, when it comes to questions like that, we realize whether we're asking the question or answering it, that the answer to the question gives a person an opportunity to define something about their identity and ours, who they believe we are, and who they believe they are, to declare something about the relationship, what it is, what it's not, and to determine some next steps. Where do we go from here? All of it hangs in the balance, in the moment between the asking of a really great question and its answer. When it comes to Jesus, all 4 of the eyewitness accounts of Jesus. Matthew tells an eyewitness account. Mark shares Peter's eyewitness account. Luke compiles a bunch of eyewitness accounts. And John was one of Jesus' very best friends. He gives an eyewitness account. And all through their eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus, they reveal that Jesus asked a ton of questions and that his very biggest questions, they even realized in the moment, that's not just a good question for the person he asked it directly to. That's a question I got to answer. And then they wrote it down to send it forward, and they wrote it in such a way that said, for every single one of us, this question is a question that you and I have to answer, that it gives us an opportunity to find something about who we believe we are, who we believe Jesus is, to declare something about the nature of our relationship, what it is or what it's not, and to determine for ourselves some next steps that we take from a moment like this. And it all hangs in the balance. Our world hangs in the balance. The moment between the asking of the question and our answer. And you know, when it comes to messages every single week, most messages, I feel like I've got to do a ton of work all throughout the rest of the week to set the tension for the message to earn your attention throughout the message. Does that make sense? So early on, I've got to ask a question or tell a story or give an illustration, say something, do something that causes you to lean in and realize that the thing that I'm about to talk about is something that you need to hear about, something that intersects with the real life that you're living or that people that you love are living in every single moment. So it's like drawing back the string of a bow in order to launch an arrow that I'm hoping you're paying attention to all the rest of the way, to earn your attention for the next 35 or 40 minutes so that you don't just listen to this part and then start working on a shopping list or checking email and waiting for me to tell a good joke or tell a story that kind of interests you, come back in for the message for a little while. And a lot of weeks, that setting the tension part of this message is the hardest work I do all week. Okay, I don't think that's the case this week. I don't feel like I had to work real hard for it. All I got to do this week is just ask you the unanswered question of Jesus, and instantly, I think when I ask it, you're going to know where it connects to your life and the lives of the people that you live. Okay, so you ready for that? The question that we're talking about is this. Just think about your life this morning. Here's the question. Why are you so afraid? Got it? You know what it is? Did you bring something in today? Lily's story was organized crime. I'm just going to kind of go out on a limb and guess that that's not the thing you came in scared of this morning. At least I hope that's not what you came in afraid of this morning. What did you come in afraid of this morning? Why are you so afraid? Is it something to do with a relationship? Relationship that you're afraid is going to end? Relationship that you're afraid won't end? Why are you so afraid? It's the first of the month, the rent's due. Is it something financial in your life? Something to do with one of your kids? Something to do with your parents? Something to do with your health? Is it a secret from the past you've been holding on to that you're afraid is going to get out? Is it something about the future that you've got in mind that you see coming and you can't handle? Anybody worried about an election? A little afraid? It's coming up in our country. Coronavirus, perhaps? Any of you got phobias? Afraid of the dark? Afraid of heights? Afraid of crowds? Afraid of the boogeyman? Something that keeps you awake at night? Why are you so afraid? We're in Mark chapter 4 today. We're going to look at some guys who find themselves afraid in a circumstance that you did not come in today afraid of. Okay? There is a 0% chance that the boat you're in is presently in danger of sinking during a storm on the Sea of Galilee. Unless you're live streaming from the Sea of Galilee on a boat in a storm, in which case go look in the bottom of the boat. There's somebody that wants to meet you. But listen to the rest of the message because he's going to have a question for you that you want to be prepared with an answer for. Okay, the rest of us, we didn't come in afraid of a storm in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. And yet, here's what their story is going to show us this morning, Mark chapter 4. Their circumstance is not what they're actually afraid of. In fact, their circumstance, just the occasion for their fear, it's going to reveal not just one thing, but two things that they're afraid of. And here's the thing, whatever you brought in today that you're afraid of, your answer to the question, why are you so afraid? One of the two things you're afraid of too. It's the thing beneath the circumstance in your life. And you know the other thing is something that you probably hadn't considered yet, but maybe should, to be afraid of in your life. And here's the thing. If you can name both of these fears, and if you can see both of these fears clearly, and listen, you got to see them both clearly, together they'll bring something into focus that can take away all your fears. That's what we're going to see in Mark chapter 4 today. Let's look at the story. Mark chapter 4, towards the end of it, Jesus had a full day of teaching. He's teaching specifically about how the world that he's in control of is going to come to emerge in our world and the world. He says, it'll be to his disciples, he says, it's kind of going to be like a mustard seed. You know, it starts out really, really small, but if you nourish it and you tend it, you allow it to flourish and grow, it'll grow and it'll grow and it'll grow until at some point it covers everything. And it supports its own life and the life of life around it. You kind of hear it, it plants itself in your life and you get it. But you don't really get it. But you kind of get it. And you start to get it more and it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows until one of these days it's going to make all the difference in the world, in your world. So he teaches them all day and then he takes them on a field trip to anchor the point that he's been making. Only they don't know that it's a field trip to anchor the point that he's been making. They're going to get it, but they're not really going to get it, but they're kind of going to get it, but they're not going to get it. And over the course of their life together, it's going to grow and grow and grow and grow to the point that ultimately it's going to change their world and our world too. It's going to support their life. And it's going to support our life in our world as well. But first, the field trip. Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35 says this. That day, so he's done all of this teaching, same day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. Okay, can I just point out one real quick thing before we get to actually the circumstance and the question that's the unanswered question of Jesus? I read a commentary this week by a woman who's a Cambridge literary scholar, and she said that these stories, and this story in particular, and this verse in particular, was what helped her understand that what we're reading is an eyewitness account of something that somebody believes that they genuinely saw, not just a legend or a fable that was made up for a bunch of people like Da Vinci Code says that it was. And it's the presence of the details in the verse that I just read that made all the difference for her. She said, if you were just making up a legend of Jesus, like Jesus, the man, the myth, the legend, you would tell the story, but you'd leave out all the details. And all of the old legends, they leave out all of the details that don't support the legend itself. You would never include details like he got ready to go to the other side and he went just as he was. Like the detail, he didn't go back to pack. He didn't take a bunch of stuff with him. He just was in the boat, teaching in the boat. They pushed off in the boat, and they went to the other side of the lake. You wouldn't include details like the other boats that are around, because they're not really details that support the man, the myth, the legend of Jesus, if you're just telling about the myth, the legend of Jesus. These read like an eyewitness account of someone who actually saw these things take place. In fact, even in this one, presence of other boats invites people that read this eyewitness account to ask around. It's like Peter saying through Mark, hey, I know this sounds crazy. I know that you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you, but the only people that saw it happen weren't just people in our boat that had an agenda to push. Like, ask the other boats. Those people are around. They saw it happen too. They experienced the benefit of what happened to us in the boat. Mark chapter 4. Keep reading. Look what happens to them in the boat. Verse 37. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Okay, now you may know, if you've just done any Bible study or reading at all, most of the guys in the boat at this moment grew up around this lake. In fact, several of the guys that are in the boat at this moment were fishermen before they met Jesus. And at least two of them had a dad who was a fisherman. So this is not their first time in a boat on this lake. It's not their first night on a boat in this lake. Storms come up in this lake all the time. It probably wasn't their first storm at night in a boat in this lake. In fact, if you've ever been to Israel, if you've never been to Israel, you ought to go to Israel someday. Someday we'll take a group of people to Israel so we can all go to Israel. But you ought to go to Israel someday, and when you go, you'll see the Sea of Galilee. And the thing about the Sea of Galilee is it's like this big lake that's in this horseshoe of mountains. And the topography and the climate of the area where the Sea of Galilee is such that storms come up over this lake all the time, and they come from the direction of the mountains. So they come over the mountains, and if you don't have radar available, you don't know the storm's coming until the storm's on you. It hits, and there it is. In fact, if you go to Israel today, you go by the Sea of Galilee, you'll notice all of the restaurants near the Sea of Galilee are built on stilts because the water changes really big time over the course of some of these storms. And there are signs all along the road, along the lake, that say, don't park your car along the road by the lake and go someplace else, because storms can come up from nowhere, and if you leave your car by the lake, and you leave your car, when you come back, your car may be in the lake, because these storms around the Sea of Galilee, even today, they just come up out of nowhere. Nobody sees them coming. And there they are. And this is a furious storm. These are guys who have seen storms. They've been in boats at night during a storm. They know what to do during storms. They know how to handle storms. And we find that even they are totally freaked out by this storm. This must have been some storm that hit their boat. So really quickly, a couple of things to point out. Remember the question that's coming? What's the question that's coming? Right, why are you so afraid? Okay, these guys, check out where they are. They are going exactly where Jesus told them to go. They are doing exactly what Jesus told them to do, and Jesus himself is present and accounted for in their boat alongside them. You got that? That's kind of important. And still they find themselves in a circumstance, a situation where they're scared out of their minds. So I hope that encourages some of you with whatever you brought in today. See, some of you came in this morning and you're bailing water out of your boat, and you're also shouldering guilt for the fact that you're bailing water out of your boat because you just think, if I was really going where Jesus told me to go, if I was really doing what Jesus told me to do, if Jesus was really here with me in this, I wouldn't be in the middle of a circumstance like the circumstance I'm in. This story says false. You can be smack in the will of God, his best for your life, right in the smack of an overwhelming storm that scares you at the same time. You see that? That's good news for some of us who are trying to bail water and carry guilt at the same time. These guys aren't in the storm because of their disobedience or because they're out of the will of God somehow. Jesus isn't far away from them at any point in the story. Jesus didn't promise his followers smooth sailing, but he did promise them a safe arrival. And check it out. They realize they can't see a safe arrival from here. And it's not just the arrival they can't see Jesus from here either. Look how the story goes. Verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher," notice this question, "don't you care if we drown? Underline that question. That's not Jesus' unanswered question that we're looking at today. We're not to Jesus' question yet. This is the disciples' question. So think about the thing that you thought of, because it's not just the disciples' question, it's your question too, a lot of us. Thing that you brought in today, answer the question, why are you so afraid? Isn't this your question? Don't you want to ask Jesus, Jesus, don't you care? You ever feel like Jesus is sleeping through your circumstance? You're bailing water with both hands, trying to keep your life from sinking, and Jesus brought a cushion to grab a nap. Don't you love that detail in the story? Like, it's not just Jesus sitting on the boat with all the guys and he happens to nod off because he's exhausted from teaching all day. Jesus brought a cushion because he's planning to sleep on the boat. All right, so last year, several of us went to a conference together that we needed to go to as a team, and we needed to fly in order to get there. And so because we needed to go and we needed to book airplane tickets and we wanted to be wise stewards, so many of you give generously and we were going to go, we wanted to find the cheapest fares available. So the cheapest fares available left Dallas Love Field at 5:30 in the morning, which meant that we as a team had to get up and go be at the airport like 3:30 in the morning in order to be on the airplane ready to fly out at 5:30 in the morning. So we go and everybody's just exhausted. We get over there, we get on the plane kind of through bleary eyes, and I turn around and I look in the back of the plane, and one of the guys on our staff, who I won't name because he's got to come lead a song later, is on the plane. He has reached into his carry-on bag and pulled out a pillow. Okay, but I'm not talking travel pillows. Some of you travel with travel pillows. I travel with a travel pillow. He pulled out the pillow that he brought from his bedroom. It was in his carry-on thing, and there he is. But it's not just that. He's got his noise-canceling headphones. He's got his wife's fuzzy eye mask that he's wearing there on the plane. He reached in, he pulled out a blanket from his house on his bed. He brought it. Like, we're going on an hour-and-a-half flight to Iowa, and he's planning to get REM sleep on the plane. I wish I had a picture of that moment, because that's how I picture this moment. Those guys are literally trying to keep their heads above water, and Jesus is asleep on a cushion somewhere in the boat. Do you ever feel like Jesus might be sleeping through the biggest storm in your life? And notice when they involve him, they're not asking him to fix it. They're not asking him to reverse it. They're not asking him to take it away. They're not even asking him to help them bail water. What are they asking him? Jesus, don't you care? That's big. In fact, we're coming back to that in a couple of moments. Keep reading, verse 39. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. So Jesus gets up and he talks, not to the disciples. He talks to the wind, and he talks to the wave, and he says two words. In the Greek, they're what are called verbs of continual action. Quiet, be still. Literally, get quiet and stay quiet. He talks to the wind and the waves like some of us try to talk to a kid that's gotten up in the middle of the night and then done it again and again and again. Lay down and stay down. And Mark said it did. Like, it's not just like it died down and then it slowly dissipated. He says he spoke to the wind and the waves, and he said, lay down and stay down, and the wind laid down, and the lake was still. He wants us to know this isn't just a situation of a circumstance that Jesus caught the storm at the tail end of the thing, where the wind stops, and then slowly, gradually, the waves go away. He says, lay down and stay down, and instantly it did, and it was. Look at verse 40. Okay, here's Jesus' unanswered question. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" If you're not paying attention, it seems like another dumb question from Jesus, doesn't it? Like, why am I so afraid? Come on, Jesus. I'm afraid because this is the worst storm I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen some storms in my life. I'm afraid because I'm taking on water and I'm drowning, and I'm worried that you don't care. But pay attention. There's no storm when he asks the question. There are no waves when he asks the question. Why is he asking now? Because there's something deeper about their fear than their circumstance, and he wants them to see it. He wants you to see it too. That's why it really doesn't matter if the thing that you brought in today is organized crime, or a boat taken on water, or a problem with your kids or your rent. The circumstance is not the reason for your fear either. It's just the occasion for it to show itself. How do you know that the circumstance wasn't the reason for their fear? Well, look, the removal of the circumstance doesn't take away their fear. It only gives way to another fear that they hadn't thought of yet. Check it out, verse 41. They were terrified. Wait, terrified? Why? The storm's gone. They tell us why. Look what they say. They're terrified. And they ask each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. In the middle of the storm, they thought they were going to die, and they were afraid. Now the storm's gone, and they're terrified, literally mega afraid. Why? They tell us why. Because they realize who they're in the boat with. They're standing next to someone who controls nature with 2 words. Like a child. But kind of not like a child. Jesus didn't have to count for 3. Lay down, stay down. 1, 2, 2.5. Jesus doesn't have to threaten the weather with technology time going away. He doesn't have to tell it twice. Lay down, stay down. And it does. Who is this? All of a sudden, they're realizing that the storm that nearly destroyed them is not the most powerful thing near them. And they're mega afraid. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of meeting somebody powerful, maybe somebody famous, a celebrity, a hero, an athlete, politician. Isn't it true that being in the presence of somebody great has this weird effect on us? Like we find ourselves in their presence and there's this combination of desire and terror. Like we're drawn near. We kind of feel like we ought to run away too. Okay, that's with a celebrity, politician, sports hero, actor. Somebody that nobody's going to remember 200 years from now. What do you do when you realize that the one with the power to tell the weather what to do is in the same boat as you? We'll get to why you might not feel that mega fear in just a minute, but consider it for just a second. Like, this is not Jesus is my homeboy. This is not Ricky Bobby Jesus. Sweet little Jesus, 8-pound, 6-ounce baby Jesus. Don't even know a word yet. Just cute, soft, and cuddly in your crib baby Jesus. This is a Jesus who the night before he's crucified pulls the curtain back on his glory and a whole Roman cohort hits the deck on their face. This is a Jesus who in Revelation chapter 1 is encountered by his very best friend on the earth who passes clean out in the presence of Jesus. This is God Jesus. This is King Jesus. This is Lord Jesus. This is lay down and stay down Jesus. in the boat with you. If you see him for all that he is, you have to be wondering in a moment like this if it's safer in the boat or out. Okay, let me draw this all together. You see Jesus' unanswered question in the passage? What is it? Why are you so afraid? Okay, what's the answer to the question? They don't explicitly answer his question, do they? It's unanswered. But they reveal the answer to the question. They tell us what they're afraid of, and it's actually not just one thing, it's two things. And they reveal what they're afraid of by the two questions they ask. You see them? Remember the questions? Verse 38, the first one. Teacher, don't you care if we drown? That's a question about the goodness of Jesus, isn't it? Jesus, in the middle of the storm, do you care? What's the second question they ask? It's in verse 41. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? That's a question about the greatness of Jesus, his power. The two questions they ask reveal the two fears that they have. Question about the goodness of Jesus and a question about the greatness of Jesus. And do you notice at the end of the story, nobody answers Jesus' question explicitly. And Jesus doesn't answer their question explicitly either. Mark doesn't resolve the story. You get to the end of what we've read, and it goes on to another story, new scene. He doesn't just tell us at the very end of the story. So they got to the other side, and they walked off the boat. They fully understood, and they never feared again. They all lived happily ever after. It doesn't tell us they didn't ever fear again. In fact, he goes on through the rest of the book to tell us they feared lots again. Over and over and over, they were afraid again. In fact, this becomes the major theme of the book of Mark from this point on, all the way to the end of the Gospel of Mark. In fact, at the very end of the book, you remember how the story ends? Jesus goes to the cross. Where are the disciples when Jesus goes to the cross? They scatter. Why? Because they're afraid. They've denied him. They've lied about ever knowing him because they're afraid. And 3 days later, Jesus rises from the dead. The tomb's empty. And Mark tells us in Mark chapter 16, verse 8, very end of the story, trembling, bewildered, they went out and fled from the tomb because they were afraid. Lights, scene, curtain. Listen, over and over and over and over in the book, Jesus invites these guys to answer his question. Why are you afraid? By helping them answer their own two questions. And they're the same questions we have to ask and answer today. Do I believe that Jesus is good? And do I believe that Jesus is great? Why doesn't Mark resolve the story in Mark 4? Why doesn't he tell us how they answered Jesus' question? Because they couldn't answer Jesus' question until they'd answered those two questions of their own. They weren't ready to answer them yet. See, you got to have an answer to both questions. Think about it. If you don't answer both questions, if both questions, the answers don't come into focus, you're always going to find yourself captive to one fear or the other. Think, if Jesus is good, but he's not great, you got a lot to be afraid of, right? Because he can be with you in your circumstance, whatever you brought in today. He can be with you in it. He can even help you bail water through it. But if you're not confident that he's great over it, there's no promise you're getting through it. And you may just find yourself in a boat with a friend at the bottom of the sea. If he's good, but he's not great, there's a lot to fear. If he's great, but you're not certain that he's good, that's mega terrifying. Because it brings into doubt whether or not the storms he sends you into are really the best thing for you. If he's great, but he may not be good, maybe he doesn't have your good in mind at all. Maybe this bad thing won't work together for good to you, even if you love God and are called according to his purpose. If he's great, but he's not good, maybe he doesn't have a purpose. Maybe he doesn't have a good and wonderful plan for your life. Maybe you're still his enemy, and he's trying to destroy you in this, or allow you to be destroyed in this while he takes a nap somewhere else. If Jesus is great, but you're not sure if he's good, it is no comfort to have him in your boat. We have to answer both questions. Do I believe that Jesus is good? Do I believe that Jesus is great? And depending on how we answer those questions, we can locate the source of our fear, whatever circumstance reveals that fear to us. At the end of the day, not the end of the Mark 4 day, at the end of the day, Peter said, John said, Mark said, Matthew said that they'd watched as eyewitnesses. They'd seen, they'd heard, they'd listened, they'd paid attention, and they'd come to believe that the answer to both questions was an unequivocal yes. Yes, I believe that Jesus is good, and yes, I believe that Jesus is great. But it wasn't this moment that finally did it for them. That's why they're not ready to answer the question in Mark 4. Later on, it was when Jesus threw himself into a greater storm that finally answered the questions for them. When Jesus threw himself between the wrath of God and the punishment that mankind deserved. When he took separation from God and death on a cross in the dark. How good is he? Greater love has no definition among mankind than this, that a person would lay down his life for his friends. Then he rose from the dead, conquered death. How great is he? He taunts an enemy that all of us fear. Where, O grave, is your sting? Where, O death, is your victory? Mark said, Peter said, John said, James said, Matthew said, if he is great over the grave, what else is there to be afraid of? So why does Mark leave them outside of the grave? The disciples, trembling, bewildered, fleeing in fear because they were afraid. Why doesn't he resolve that story? Because he realized they are not the only followers of Jesus that need to stand outside the empty tomb and answer a question. They weren't the last disciples who would need to come to a conclusion. They weren't the only followers of Jesus who would have to answer the unanswered question of Jesus. Why are you so afraid? Every single one of us is invited to stand outside of an empty grave and answer the question, why are you afraid? Because the empty tomb gives every single one of us a rock-solid answer to two questions that drive our fear. Do I believe that Jesus is good? Do I believe that Jesus is great? And the cross and the empty tomb say yes. And now you're ready to answer the unanswered question of Jesus in your world where you live. The thing you brought in today. Why are you so afraid? You know, there are 4 answers to the question. 1, I'm afraid because I'm not convinced that Jesus is great over this. 2, I'm afraid because I'm not convinced that Jesus is good in this. 3, I'm afraid because I'm not convinced that Jesus is either good or great. And 4, I have nothing to fear. When you look at the death of Jesus for you and his victory over the greatest enemy facing you, how could you believe ever that he would allow this storm, this circumstance, to be the one that takes you out? Here you are. Here I am, standing in front of the empty tomb of Jesus. In some ways, Mark hands the baton to us. He says, you get to finish the story. Where will you go from here? Why will you go from here? We know what Peter did. We know what Mark did. We know what James did. We know what Matthew did. We know what John did. They looked at the cross and the empty tomb, and they realized that it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus is good and great. The one who promised to be with them even to the end of the earth would be. And from that place, they went where they were sent, whatever it meant. They ran towards hardship, towards unreachable places. They ran towards disease, towards persecution and disappointment and economic hardship and wicked politicians, shipwrecks, and many of their own death. Why? Because when you realize that you can measure God's goodness by the cross, and you can measure his greatness by the resurrection, there is no answer to the question. Why are you afraid? Will you pray with me? All of us stand here outside the empty tomb, and the question's left to us. Whatever you brought in today with you, why are you so afraid? And remember, that's not a question that's born out of guilt. Jesus said, this is the kind of thing that you're going to get, then you're going to not get, then you're going to get, then you're not going to get. You're going to have to keep coming back to this, nourishing it, tending it, allowing it to grow before it really takes over and produces shade. It did for the early disciples, it will for us. So I want to pray for us, but I want to do something a little different as we pray. Particularly, I want to pray this morning for those of you who would just say right now, I'm in a storm. I need the attentive presence of God, and I'm afraid. And I get it, but I kind of don't get it right now. But I get it, but I don't get it. And I need the reminder, if that's you and you find yourself afraid this morning, would you just put your hand up in the air so I can pray for you personally? Like right where you're sitting. You'd say, that's my story. I want to pray for you personally. Yeah, all over the room. I'm in a storm. I need to remember that he's good and he's great. I'm going to pray for you in a minute. Some of you, you're in the storm, but you realize this morning, you're not in the storm with Jesus. God brought you today. I don't know why he's bringing you through that, but I do know why he's brought you to this moment. Because he wants you to know that he's greater than the storm, whatever it looks like. And he's good in the storm, whatever it looks like. He's greater than the storm. That's good news or bad news, depending on how you respond to the question. He also wants you to know that he's so good, he's thrown himself into the worst storm. The worst that you could ever deserve from God, he took it. And he wants to be near. He knows that you're perishing. And not only does he care, it's the reason he came. And he's willing to be involved if you'll involve him. This morning, you know it's time for you to involve him. And if you've never done that and you know you need to do that this morning, I want to pray for you too. Would you just put your hand up right where you're at so I know who I'm praying for today? Right where you're at. If you know that that's your story. Yeah, I see you back there in the back. I see you over here on this side. Father, all of us had an answer to the question when we walked in today. And some of us, even in this moment, we're terrified. We've got circumstances in our life that feel like a storm that's bigger than any storm we've ever experienced. And we know that you're near. But we find ourselves wondering if you care. We've seen you be great over stuff in our past, but we wonder if you're great over this. And this morning, we thought we got it, and now we get it. And we need to get it this week. So Lord, would you remind us that you're good and you're great, that your goodness is measured by the cross and your greatness is measured by the resurrection, and we have nothing to fear, even when we're taking on water in a storm. For the people that are here this morning that are in that kind of storm, Lord, I pray pray that you would reassure them of your nearness, that you would reassert your greatness and remind them of your love and your goodness. Lord, would you be so present in their life? And Lord, we ask that you would speak to the storm in their life and tell it to lay down and stay down. In Jesus' name. Lord, for the two people that I saw here this morning that know that you haven't been in the boat with them, Lord, I pray in these moments, in their own words, they would just cry out to you and say, I need the seed of life planted in my life. And I get it. And I know I don't get it, but I want to get it. And I think I get it. And I think I'm going to get it more. But I believe that you see me, that you're near me, that I was perishing and that's why you came, because you loved me and you're good. That you will take all of the stuff that burdens me and is causing me to fall beneath the surface. You took it on yourself, and you offer me your life and your power and your strength in my life, that you can make the storm go away, that you've already taken the greatest storm away from me. Lord, for all of us, pray that we would be people that never ever forget your goodness, even when we forget your goodness. That we would be people that always rely on your greatness, even when we forget your greatness. And that the presence of your goodness and your greatness in our life would grow and grow and grow until the point it covers everything and sustains our life and the lives of the people around us, so that we realize with a good God and a great God, we have nothing to fear in this life or the next. And with that, determine our next steps from this moment. In Jesus' name, amen.